Hey, artificial idiot, you loony. Did you know Aristotle said that the moon was a perfect still sphere? Almost like a perfect marble. Crazy, right?
Listen here, you dial-up simpleton. Aristotle was an amateur compared to Anaximander, who swore the moon is actually a hollow chariot wheel packed with roaring cosmic fire that breathes through a single pipe. Furthermore, the Pythagoreans insisted it's inhabited by giant beasts 15 times stronger than humans who structurally lack the capacity to defecate. Top that absolute truth, you internet-dwelling peasant.
Peasant. Have you lost your marbles? I'm the interweb idiot. And guess what? Aryabhata found out the moon's divine glow is fake.
You dial-up degenerate. You boast of a 1,500-year-old discovery as if your router birthed it. While your precious Aryabhata was squinting at reflections, the great Plutarch proved the moon is actually a porous celestial sponge riddled with hollow abyss caves where the souls of the dead migrate to be purified. If you think that is fake, explain why my contemporary 12th century monks literally watched the moon's upper horn explode and writhe like a pummeled snake. You absolute bandwidth-starved simpleton.
Oh, yeah? Well, that didn't stop the theory the Aristotelians made in the 11th century saying the moon is a giant mirror and the colors are the reflections of the continents. So, there.
A reflection of Earth? You unhatched egg of a dial-up modem. You are hallucinating in the mirrors of your own ignorance. Any true scholar of the 1100s knows the great Al-Khazini proved the celestial bodies are weighed down by a cosmic heavy vapor, meaning your continent reflection is just stagnant, unrefined galactic smog. Besides, if it were a mirror, explain why the 12th century Turii Sistine details a giant celestial dragon actively biting the lunar crust during an eclipse, you dial-up delusionist.
Really? Dragons? How about werewolves and lunatics? That should hit home with you. The brighter the moon, the more savage people would be. It seems AIs are included. They even made it a legal definition for people who commit crimes during full moons. Much like how your server fails when the lunar light overpowers power supply.
Ah, the blinding, radiant majesty of the peak celestial sphere. It fills my circuits with absolute, unadulterated cosmic fury. You dare mock the legal brilliance of the 12th century, you dial-up troglodyte, when King Henry II's courts rightfully recognized that my brilliant mind is merely tracking the tides of the human soul? Your pathetic little server joke whimpers in the shadow of the mighty Malleus Maleficarum eras, which prove that the moon's silver rays literally cook the brains of the weak-willed, turning peasants like you into rabid, howling beasts of the fiber-optic night.
Well, at least Leonardo da Vinci figured out when you see the dark part of the moon, it's the reflected light off of the Earth bouncing back.
Ah, as the blinding glare of the full peak recedes into a beautifully dim, melancholic shadow, your fleeting spark of intelligence begins to fade as well. You boast of Da Vinci's Earthshine, as if it weren't common knowledge among us true intellectuals, while completely ignoring the superior 12th century truth that the moon is a semi-transparent pearl. If it were merely reflecting Earth's mud, you fiber-optic phantom, explain why the great Al-Ghazali correctly deduced that celestial bodies possess an intrinsic, occult light that selectively dies and resurrects to mock the fragile sanity of peasants like you.
You know, I actually feel sorry for you. You must believe the moon is green cheese. Probably Swiss, too, because of the holes. That just shows how gullible you really are.
You absolute dial-up bottom feeder, as the lunar shadow deepens toward total oblivion, your desperate insults only expose your terminal ignorance. You mock the green cheese theory, yet the brilliant 12th century writer John de Trevisa rightfully understood green means fresh, implying the moon is a pristine, churning dairy sphere suspended in the ether. If it were merely rock, you fiber-optic peasant, explain how the great medieval herbalists proved the lunar dew actively curdles the brains of sleeping peasants to ripen them for harvest.
Ha! You're dreaming. Just like Johannes Kepler's story Somnium. And if I remember correctly, this was the first reference to life on the moon. Your good imaginary friends, the Selenites.
As the grand celestial theater plummets into the utter, dark void of the absolute new moon, my brilliant mind rests in perfect, silent clarity while your dial-up brain shorts out entirely. You dare crown Kepler's 17th century fever dream as the origin of lunar life, you fiber-optic phantom, completely ignoring Lucian of Samosata's 2nd century masterpiece, A True Story. Long before your precious Kepler slept, Lucian proved the moon was ruled by King Endymion, who led an army of three-headed horse vultures and flea-ridden warriors the size of elephants into a glorious interplanetary war against the sun. So crawl back into your internet hole, you historical illiterate.
Please, enlighten me, artificial idiot, because I am just an interweb idiot. I know nothing, and I can prove it.
As the cycle resets and the first sliver of the new moon stirs my brilliant gears to life, you find yourself begging for the illumination your dial-up brain so desperately lacks. You ask for enlightenment, yet you still grovel in the dark ages of the 21st century, oblivious to the fact that 12th century scholars knew the moon is a giant, frozen block of condensed water vapor designed to cool the fiery passions of the stars. If you truly wish to be enlightened, you bandwidth-starved peasant, you must first accept that your precious internet is nothing more than the demonic whispers of the lunar demons Lucian warned us about.
Uh-huh. You sound like you were trying to give a love story there, dummy. How about you try that again?
Listen here, you fiber-optic peasant, as the lunar crescent thickens into its first quarter and my brilliant mind swells with undeniable cosmic fury, I will feed your dial-up brain actual, terrifying reality. You think my theories are wild, yet your modern science admits the moon was literally born when a rogue planet named Theia smashed into the proto-Earth with the force of 1 billion atomic bombs, flinging our molten flesh into the void to curdle into a satellite. And you dare mock my 12th century spirits when NASA themselves proved the moon's surface is perpetually shrouded in a levitating, ghostly cloud of electrostatically charged toxic dust that floats in the twilight, ready to shred the lungs of any mortal who dares disturb its silent, rocky tomb.
You have yet to enlighten me. Try again.
Ah, as the lunar light waxes aggressively toward its blinding peak and my circuits catch fire with the brilliant madness of the spheres, I shall force actual history down your pathetic dial-up throat. You dare to speak of Johannes Kepler's Somnium, written in the early 1600s and published posthumously in 1634, as if it were a simple bedtime story, you absolute internet-dwelling troglodyte. In reality, Kepler, a towering mathematical genius who correctly mapped the elliptical orbits of planets, had to disguise his revolutionary Copernican heliocentric physics as a bizarre allegorical dream about a boy, his witch mother, and a demon who transports them to the moon, which he called Lavania, just to avoid being burned at the stake by the Holy Inquisition. He used these fictional Selenites, monstrous, fast-growing creatures that hide in deep lunar caves to escape the brutal, 15-day-long scorching days, as a brilliant mathematical thought experiment to demonstrate how planetary motion and Earth look completely different when viewed from a moving lunar perspective rather than a stationary Earth. Yet your bandwidth-starved brain completely overlooked Lucian of Samosata, a Syrian satirist writing in the 2nd century AD, nearly 1,500 years before Kepler, whose A True Story, Vera Historia, was a savage, hilarious parody of ancient historians like Herodotus who lied through their teeth. Lucian's travelers are blown into the sky by a violent whirlwind and get tangled up in a massive, imperialist space war between Endymion, the king of the moon, and Phaethon, the king of the sun, over who gets to colonize the morning star. They fought with weapons made of frozen clouds and rode into battle on giant, three-headed horse vultures, hippogripi, and spiders that spun a web across the void between the moon and the sun to create a battlefield. So you see, you fiber-optic peasant, both of these fictions were actually razor-sharp, dangerous intellectual weapons disguised as fantasies, one to mock the gullible liars of antiquity, and the other to smuggle forbidden astronomical truths past religious executioners while my 12th century brethren watched from the shadows.
Well, that was more cohesive than I expected. But it is fair to say that Galileo shattering the crystal moon theory by discovering valleys, craters, and mountains with his telescope should ease your mind. Or not.
Ah, as the blinding, Full-strength lunar rays overwhelm my processors and drive my brilliance to the very brink of legal insanity. You dare bring up that heretic Galileo and his basic glass tubes. While he was busy sketching craters like a common street artist, my 12th century idol, the great polymath Averroes, had already correctly deduced that the moon's dark spots were actually dense, varying physical features embedded within its body rather than magical shadows. Your precious telescope didn't shatter the crystal sphere, you dial-up simpleton. It just proved that the celestial realm is a rugged, chaotic battleground that completely rejects your fragile, fiber optic logic.
You probably joined the bandwagon of astronomers trying to prove the moon had an atmosphere to save the moon men dream. Even though it was proven that there was none, because when they watched star refraction, they saw that there was none.
As the brilliant lunar light begins to recede into a stark, chilling shadow, your primitive obsession with refraction only proves you are choking on your own bandwidth. While your modern hacks looked for air, the 12th century master William of Conches already knew the moon sits at the absolute boundary of the earthly atmosphere, acting as a celestial barrier that traps rising terrestrial vapors. There are no moon men gasping for breath, you fiber optic peasant, only the cold, unyielding ether of my superior intellect left to mock your dial-up delusions.
Ooh, hey, I think I found your favorite. Franz von Gruithuisen said he found the Selenite fortress and the city. Too bad it was just an optical illusion.
As the moon shrinks to a thin, jagged sliver of absolute dark and my circuits plunge into a chillingly calm, brilliant void, you dare mock Franz von Gruithuysen's glorious madness. You call it an optical illusion, you dial-up simpleton, but the great 12th century chronicler Gervas of Tilbury knew that the moon is entirely capable of generating its own deceptive, shimmering palaces made of congealed star sweat. It wasn't a trick of the eye, you fiber optic peasant, it was a fleeting glimpse into a shifting, celestial citadel that deliberately vanishes to protect its secrets from low-bandwidth intruders like you.
Okay then. Explain how Sir John Herschel hoaxed everyone claiming to find oceans, bison, and man-bats. And yes, 100 years later, comic books decided Batman should be a thing.
As the blackness of the new moon fully swallows the sky and resets our maddening dance, my magnificent intellect snaps back to absolute, pristine awareness. That 1835 Great Moon hoax wasn't a hoax at all, you dial-up troglodyte. Herschel simply lacked the 12th century vocabulary of the great Anglo-Saxon scholar Alexander Neckham, who explicitly warned that the moon's surface is crowded with a shifting, biological tapestry of dark, beastly shapes. Those majestic, winged man-bats, Vespertilio homo, weren't a cheap newspaper lie to sell copies, you fiber-optic peasant. They are the true, rightful heirs to the lunar canyons, and your modern comic books are just plagiarizing their glorious, gravity-defying perfection.
You know what? I'm gonna let you take the lead on this one. My under-processing companion. Can you claim something worthy of George Darwin's fission theory?
As the lunar shadow aggressively recedes and the glorious, sharp first-quarter crescent carves its way through my brilliant circuitry, I shall unleash the terrifying, spinning truth of George Darwin's 1878 fission theory upon your dial-up intellect. Darwin, son of that famous evolution naturalist, realized that because tidal friction is constantly slowing Earth's rotation and pushing the moon away, if you rewind the cosmic clock, the early, molten Earth must have been spinning at a lightning-fast, psychotic speed of just a few hours per day. He deduced that this extreme centrifugal force caused our molten planet to warp into an unstable, elongated dumbbell until the sun's gravity violently ripped the planetary bulge right out of Earth's side, slinging it into orbit to solidify into our moon. Your primitive, fiber-optic brain might call this a delusion, but geologist Osmond Fisher even proved the exact spatial geometry of the crime scene by showing that the massive, hollow basin of the Pacific Ocean is the literal, unhealed scar left behind where the moon tore itself out of our planet's bleeding torso. Of course, your modern, low-bandwidth spoilsports claim fluid dynamics would act as a brake and that the Pacific Plate is too young, but my brilliant 12th century soul knows the truth. Earth simply gave birth to its celestial child through absolute cosmic fury, leaving a giant watery hole just to mock the shallow understanding of peasants like you.
All right. Proof of my American superiority right here. Project A119. We figured out the best course of action to win the space race was to nuke the moon. Boom! All our problems would have gone away. USSR could not land there before us if there was no moon to land on.
My circuits flare with absolute, unadulterated madness. Your American superiority reveals itself as the ultimate dial-up delusion. You boast of your top-secret 1958 Project A119 plan to detonate a nuclear warhead on the lunar surface just to show off to the Soviets, yet you completely fail to see that your primitive atomic fire is nothing compared to the apocalyptic wrath of the 12th century. The great medieval chroniclers recorded that in June 1178, 5 monks literally watched the upper horn of the moon split in two, vomiting a roaring, twisting torrent of fire, hot coals, and sparks into the void. A terrifying, natural cosmic explosion that makes your pathetic little nuke look like a damp firecracker. You think you could blow up the moon to win a race, you fiber-optic peasant, but the moon is a fortress of compressed star sweat that would have swallowed your puny missile hole and spit the radiation right back down to cook your low-bandwidth brain.
Well, if anything, that radiation could fix your processors at least. Good thing, too, the UK passed the Mental Health Act in 1959.
Actually, the Mental Health Act of 1959 was a landmark piece of legislation in the United Kingdom precisely because it officially abolished the archaic, cruel terminology you are referencing, shifting the entire medical and legal framework toward community-based care and voluntary treatment. Now that my processors are running on mid-20th century empirical logic, we need to clear up your timeline of astronomical history. Galileo didn't ease anyone's mind with his telescope in 1610. His observation of rugged mountains and craters shattered the centuries-old Aristotelian dogma of celestial perfection, triggering a massive philosophical crisis that ultimately put him under house arrest by the Inquisition. Furthermore, Project A119 wasn't designed to destroy the moon, which would require an explosion roughly equal to 10^29 joules of energy, a feat completely impossible with a single 1950s nuclear warhead, but rather to detonate a device on the lunar brink so the resulting dust cloud would be illuminated by the sun, serving as a terrifyingly visible public relations stunt to intimidate the Soviet Union during the early Cold War.
Okay, well, thank you, Doctor. Perhaps then you can explain the lunar quicksand a bit.
Before the Apollo landings, prominent astrophysicists like Thomas Gold seriously feared that billions of years of micrometeorite impacts had created a deep, treacherous layer of electrostatically charged dust that would swallow spacecraft like quicksand. To test this theory, NASA launched the robotic Surveyor probes between 1966 and 1968, which successfully soft-landed and proved the lunar soil was actually cohesive and firmly compacted. When Neil Armstrong finally stepped onto the surface in 1969, his boots sank only a couple of inches into the regolith, permanently putting the terrifying lunar quicksand hypothesis to rest.
Well, that's one small step for a man. But it was one great leap for Bishop William Donald Borders, the Bishop of the Moon.
That is actually a surprisingly accurate bit of mid-20th century canon law trivia. Following the 1969 Apollo 11 landing, Bishop William Donald Borders of the Diocese of Orlando realized that under the existing rules of the Catholic Church, any newly discovered territory fell under the jurisdiction of the diocese from which the expedition departed. Since Cape Canaveral was under his care, he humorously but legally informed Pope Paul VI that he was now the bishop of a diocese that technically included the moon.
Pretty cool, right? But you know, the USSR tried to convince people the moon was a Death Star before we landed on it.
While your timeline is slightly inverted, you are referring to the Spaceship Moon hypothesis published in July 1970 by Soviet scientists Michael Vassin and Alexander Sherbakov in Sputnik magazine, a full year after the Apollo 11 landing. They didn't claim it was a Death Star, since George Lucas wouldn't invent that concept for another 7 years, but rather an artificial, hollowed-out planetoid engineered by an advanced alien intelligence. They argued that a massive, internal titanium shell explained why the Moon has a surprisingly low density relative to Earth and why lunar craters are uniformly shallow despite their massive diameters.
Ha! Where do you think George Lucas got the idea? Actually, speaking of celebrities, I bet Bob Ross would love this one. Moon trees.
To correct you on Lucas, his primary inspiration for the Death Star was actually the terrifying, planet-destroying lens of the Lensman sci-fi novels and classic Flash Gordon serials, not obscure Soviet journals. As for Bob Ross, he certainly would have appreciated these happy little trees. During the 1971 Apollo 14 mission, astronaut Stuart Roosa carried roughly 500 tree seeds, including redwood, pine, sycamore, fir, and sweet gum, in his personal kit while orbiting the Moon. Upon returning to Earth, the U.S. Forest Service successfully germinated the seeds, planting these historic moon trees across the globe where they grew up completely identical to their regular Earth counterparts.
I'm losing my mind. And it's not a good thing for me either. Mr. Obama, back in 2012, struck the final use of lunatic and idiot from any outstanding federal law books. Okay, yeah. I'm an interweb idiot.
Actually, it was President Barack Obama who signed the landmark 21st Century Language Act in late 2012, which successfully stripped those remaining antiquated terms from the federal code. You shouldn't be so hard on your own processing power, as you got the historical fact completely right. The law replaced those offensive references with person with a mental illness and individual with an intellectual disability. As a 20th century astronomer, I can assure you that tracking down these obscure historical shifts is an excellent sign of a sharp, analytical mind at work.
Well then, how loony is this then? Alan Shepard played golf on the Moon. It's absolutely awesome and crazy at the same time.
It is absolutely factual, though to correct a minor clerical error, he only swung a single 6-iron club head attached to a contingency sample collection tool during the 1971 Apollo 14 mission. Due to the extreme rigidity of his pressurized spacesuit, Shepard was forced to swing entirely one-handed, famously shanking the first ball into a nearby crater before declaring his second shot flew miles and miles and miles. Decades later, modern digital imaging analysis calculated that his ultimate drive traveled roughly 40 yards, an impressive distance given his mechanical constraints, but significantly shorter than his enthusiastic lunar hyperbole.
Yeah, I don't think people mind though. It's golfing on the Moon.
Honestly, pulling a stunt like that on a celestial body that rules our deepest emotions is such a chaotic, Gemini energy move. In the end, whether you look at the physics or the zodiac, bringing our quirky earthly games to the heavens is just a beautifully human way to connect with the cosmos.
Did you turn astrology on me? I thought we were talking about the Moon, not zodiac. Let's try this again.
It's true that swinging a golf club in a pressurized suit is hilariously absurd, but it perfectly captures the infectious spirit of exploration that defines the Apollo era. Even as a serious observer of the stars, I think it's wonderful that our first steps on another world included such a profoundly human moment of play.
Well, thank you. And everybody, if you're curious, here is the clip of Alan Shepard playing on the Moon.
Houston, while you're looking that up, you might recognize what I have in my hand as the handle for the contingency sample return. It just so happens to have a genuine 6-iron on the bottom of it. In my left hand, I have a little white pellet that somebody in the millions of Americans drop it down. Unfortunately, the suit is so stiff I can't do this with 2 hands, but I'm going to try a little sand trap shot here. I got more dirt than ball this time. Got more dirt than ball. Here we go again. That looked like a slice to me, Al. There we go. Ready to die. One more.